I don't know if you guys can hear me all right. Hopefully you can. My name is Jeremy Flynn. Actually, just moved back to the area. Um, Quite honestly, this year I moved up here. I left home originally from Vermont. Left home at 15 and came up here way back then. It was a few years ago now. And then, went off to the lower 48 again to seek bigger and better things and realized that this is where home is. So there's nothing bigger and better than this.
Same story.
Yeah. So just some background. I've been in heavy civil, environmental mitigation, all kinds of fun stuff for years, and also have my certs in health and nutrition, and have spent a lot of time studying permaculture and mycology. So we have just a small family farm, nothing commercial, where we grow mushrooms and basically all things produce. So we just opened up a whole nother acre this year, and we're going to get into some of what we did there today, because hopefully what we went through we can share with you so you don't make the same mistakes, and hopefully we can save everyone some time as they start to grow their own produce. So just a couple of things. We are going to have to contend with the wind, but we can't complain. I mean, look at the weather we have this time of year. So just a few things I want to go through today, and I'd like to keep this as an open discussion. I have a tendency, because of my northeast roots, I tend to talk too fast. So feel free to tell me to slow down at any point or ask a question if anything comes to mind. So just a few things here. I've called this community composting because we are a community, and I want to be able to share information. And if anyone has any questions once they get into the process, I'll hand out my contact information, and you can always reach out to me. I love helping, and it's a bit of a calling, so feel free at any point. Just basically walking through the art of composting. It really is an art. And we're not reinventing the wheel. All we're doing is paying attention to the natural systems that nature put in place. And instead of working against them, we're just learning from them and working with it. And then also why we should compost as a community. We'll kind of walk through the benefits of it, what it does not only for our community, our towns, the whole peninsula, but also financially how it helps us, how when we divert waste from the landfill and give it back to nature in the proper way, how it actually saves us money long term. Composting at scale. So I think everyone in attendance here who plans on composting or does compost, it's all at different scale. You could live in town and have a quarter of an acre and still compost. You could live out a homestead and have 100 acres and a massive farm, and the same principles apply. But there are things you can do to scale to your needs. So we'll go over those today as well. Composting with animals. So when I say that, don't think composting animals. That is a thing as well. It is the life cycle, and we will touch on that. But also, if you have chickens, pigs, any type of livestock, again, this is a natural system. And unfortunately, with society, especially in our culture lately, over the past 100 years, we've tend to try to make our own systems as opposed to paying attention to what nature has in place. And nature has blessed us with farm animals like chickens and pigs and whatever else you may have at your place. And how do we take our food waste, feed our animals, and then the byproduct is not only fresh eggs we didn't have to pay for feed for, but also how they work the composted product in soil and turn it into something beautiful that is very, very nutrient dense. And then composting and mycology. That's my sweet spot. So mycology is basically, let's just say, the study of mushrooms. So how does composting and mycology work just a really key role in the health and wellness of our gardens and everything we're growing, and again, the natural system around us. And then I would also like to touch on the community compost program we have in place now. I've been doing it for about, probably 6 months with the Inlet Keeper, and it's a great program. It's very, very simple, and we'll touch on that at the end. And if you're interested in that, I will stay after to give you all the information on how to get the buckets, how it all works, and we're also looking for volunteers into 2022. So if you've got some extra time and want to be part of something beautiful, just hit me up after. So just real quick, I'd love to leave the board up, but I fear the wind will not allow, so we're just going to have to adapt. So the art of composting. What is composting? We've probably all have a rough idea what composting is, but essentially what it is, it's an energetic biological process where organic matter is breaking down. So, let's just say you go to the farmer's market, or you're here today and you buy tomatoes and you buy cucumbers and different produce. When you get home, there's waste to all of it, right? If you don't want to eat the cucumber skin, you peel the cucumber. Where does that go? Well, traditionally, people just throw it in the garbage. And you may say, well, it's just, it's not even a handful of cucumber peel. It doesn't matter. But when you scale that to 362 million people in our country, then it matters, right? That little bit scaled to that size, that's massive. And if all of that is going to a landfill, believe it or not, within the landfill process, once that gets entered into the landfill, it gets sealed. And it does not decompose the way you think it would. Let's say it doesn't decompose the way it would in your compost bin. So it literally just sits there and takes up space. In my past life on the East Coast, I used to build landfills. The company I worked for, we own 75 of them. It's a disgusting process. At this point, it's a necessity in our lives. But I can tell you it is very expensive. I just rough and dirty the cost to dig a new cell at our landfill here in Soldotna, and it would be around $11 million to create a new cell, right? That's a whole new cell that's capping the existing cell. So that's our tax dollars. We all work really, really hard for it. I don't mind paying taxes, but I would much, much rather it goes to something more beneficial than digging yet another hole in the ground for us to fill full of trash. So if we can divert some of that waste and put it to good use at our homes and in our community, that's a win-win. So oftentimes people have the question of, what can I compost? Is it just food waste? Is it literally just kitchen scraps? The answer is yes, but it's also yard waste, grass clippings, leaves, sticks. I don't want to say everything that is considered organic matter, but pretty much. And obviously different sized products take a different period of time to decompose and turn into rich, nutrient-dense organic matter. But at the end of the day, that process continues. As we're done with things, as long as it's handled properly and you compost it properly, all of it can actually become topsoil eventually, or at least good, dense organic matter. I actually have a little sample here. I'll keep it closed for now because that came right out of a chicken coop. So you don't want to smell that. But what I did last night was actually make some compost tea with it. And I added this to a plant I'm growing. We do a lot of sampling at our house. So we'll get an idea and say, okay, before we scale that to an acre, let's try it in this little individual pot and see what happens, right? So last night I watered one of our plants with compost tea, took some measurements, and quite literally this morning when I left my house at about 10:30, there was measurable growth. So it is basically what this is like nutrient concentrate. And when you add it to already nutrient-dense soil, it just increases the yield of the plant exponentially. It's absolutely amazing. It is everything Miracle-Gro wants to do and cannot, but it's doing it naturally, using natural systems and no chemicals.
How long does that store? How long does the compost store?
It depends on the environment. So the beauty of where we live is it never gets to 100 degrees to the point where things start to sour immediately. I have kept that for 3 months, and it's not that I needed to get rid of it at the 3-month mark. It was just I used it all, to be honest. So I know it will last at least that long. And some of it has to do with what shape is the compost tea in at that point. But yes, it will store for an extended period of time. So kind of the second question of why should we compost? And, I touched on this briefly as far as diverting waste from our landfill. That's huge. That is absolutely huge. If we all took a little field trip, walked over to the landfill right now, and pulled everything out of the landfill that was composted, you'd be very, very surprised. And you would see the level of that landfill drop substantially. So I would like to say, not that we're going to do that, but in the future, how cool would it be to never send the material there in the first place, and then to actually use this for a beneficial purpose? Are you turning up my volume? You can. So one of the other things, not only diverting waste from the landfill, there you go. Got it? So anyone who is maybe not from here, maybe you're from the lower 48, as I said, and confessed openly, originally from Vermont. And the difference in farming in Alaska and farming in Vermont is, believe it or not, the soil in Vermont is millions and millions of years older. So it's gone through natural cycles of, am I being harassed here? Yep, I'm sorry. So the soil in Vermont, where you could just throw a seed on the ground and it just grows, it's very, very nutrient dense. Where the soil in Alaska is fairly new. I mean, this whole area was covered in ice not that long ago. So we haven't had an opportunity for many life cycles of organic matter to decay and then add nutrients to the soil. So if you go back to your house right now, dig a hole and take a soil test, it will come back and you will be very depressed because it's dead. We do it at our place all the time, and literally just ran one this May, and it came back and it didn't even register. It's just totally void of nutrients. Now that could sound depressing, and if you try to grow anything in that without amendments, basically nothing's going to grow, and if it does grow, by chance, the yield is going to be very, very low. So how do we grow our own food? We have to add nutrients back into it. So compost is how we do that. The beauty of our soil, right? Here's the silver lining, is it is set up perfectly to sequester nutrients, which is amazing. So if you compare our soil to, let's say, what they call soil in Colorado, that soil there will not hold nutrients because it perks so quick, the moisture just runs through it, takes all the nutrients with it, and it all dries down and then flows into the streams. But in Alaska, that's not the case. Our soil will actually hold it almost like a container, and it's sitting there waiting for us to tap into those nutrients. So as soon as we plant our garden, it's sitting there waiting, and then it's ready and willing to feed all of our plants, which is a beautiful thing. So when I say that the soil's dead, that's not all negative. It just means we need to amend it, and we need to work with the soil to get it to produce for us. The other beauty of it is, obviously, I said it saves the community a lot of tax dollars because we will be diverting waste. But composting allows us to grow our own food. So it's my goal. I've got three daughters ranging from 2 to 11, and I would love for them to grow up and have their own kids in our state. And I would love for their kids to live in Alaska, where we produce 90% of our own food. At this point, we're importing a lot of our produce, in particular, from the lower 48, and it's out of necessity. It's because we're not set up to grow our own. But through composting and through permaculture practices, we can produce everything we need right here. We're set up for it, and we're rugged Alaskans. So we love a good challenge, or we wouldn't be here in the first place. So I'd love to set that out there as a goal for future generations, is let's produce more here, because we take pride in everything we create. And that's, I'm honored to be part of that. So as I mentioned earlier, there's composting at scale. So what I'd like to briefly go through is what happens if you live in an apartment and you have a small compost bin. Just because of where you live doesn't mean you can't compost. So if you don't have your own garden and you're still interested in composting, we do have a community compost program. And it's very, very simple. You just get a 5-gallon or a 2-gallon bucket. You can throw all your food scraps in there and then drop it off at the community center. That's doing your part. That then goes to feed chickens and pigs and create soil elsewhere. That's beautiful. If you have a quarter of an acre and you have a small garden, maybe a raised bed, on a small scale, what works really, really well is, and I'm sure we've all seen them, you can purchase them almost anywhere, is a drum composter. So it sits up on a little stand, there's a triangular supports, and you put your food waste in there and you literally just turn it. And that's a great, great small scale way to compost. And in about 6 to 8 weeks, you will have a usable product, which is amazing. That'll save you money. You won't have to go to Home Depot and buy bagged soil. You won't have to add amendments. You can literally throw your food scraps in there, rotate the barrel, once or twice a day, which is basically aerating it. And then within 6 to 8 weeks, you're going to have a great usable product. Now, composting at medium scale, let's say you have a household garden. I know you're talking earlier, and you want to create your own compost, your own topsoil, so you can add nutrients to your soil. Well, that's perfect. Basically, there's a couple of different systems, and composting is just like everything in life. Everyone has their own opinions and their own preferences, so I'm just going to go over a real high level. And please know that with YouTube and even within our community, there's other ways and there's additional knowledge out there. But so this is an anaerobic method. So in other words, there's no mixing, and you're not using heat and air to break down the organic matter. Essentially what you're doing is pardon my art skills, I'm lacking in that department. But essentially what you're doing is pretend these are, 4x4 pallets. It's a great way to build one. That's what we have. We have a 3-bin pallet system at my house. And if you only have 2 pallets, you can have a 4x4x4 bin in your yard. Believe it or not, we've never had a problem with moose or bear, and we see both all the time. They stay out of it. Every now and then the moose will show up, stick his head in, and he's kind of grocery shopping, and decide, hey, there's plenty of other food, I'm going to leave this alone, and they walk off. He was there this morning. Yep. So with the anaerobic method, essentially what you're doing is this is a set it and forget it type method. So there's not a lot of labor involved. What you're doing is you're collecting and building that lasagna. If you heard Caitlin's talk earlier around lunchtime, that's exactly what she was talking about. Is essentially what you're doing is you're stacking in layers nutrient-dense organic matter to let it decompose on its own. Now, this process can take 6 to 8 months up to a year in our environment because temperatures don't get really, really warm here. So the whole process is a little bit delayed. This process works really well, but it does take time. So if you need topsoil or you need compost immediately, I do not recommend this process, but it's worth an experiment. So again, this is the anaerobic method. Now, if you don't mind putting some extra work in, there is the aerobic method, which is essentially that 3-bin system. So this is exactly how we have ours set up, where phase 1, we just put all the organic matter. We do try to layer it somewhat, but we don't spend a lot of time separating the layers. Essentially what we'll do is take the food scraps, throw it in. If there is any lawn clippings or anything like that, we throw it in, and we'll mix it once or twice a week. And it will sit here for about 2 weeks, and then we'll put it into this bin and then rebuild the first bin, and it keeps moving down the line. By the time it gets to phase 3, and you'll see, you can't even tell when it hits that phase 3 bin, you can't even tell what it was. Like, you can't see the tomato anymore. It's already starting to deteriorate. And when it sits in here for about 2 weeks, it comes out and it looks just like this. And it's ready to be used. I've seen it take as little as 5 weeks and as many as 8 weeks to go from the day it hits this bin to the day it comes out of that bin. And when it comes out of the phase 3 bin, you can test it. We test our soil all the time. It's ready to be used. It can go right into your garden. And the beauty of this process is we've all smelt disgusting rotting meat and produce and everything else. And it smells because it is, decomposing. But with that comes bugs and pathogens. Well, this process creates so much heat, it will actually, as it's working through, the temperatures will go up to about 135 degrees up to 160. So you get a morning like this, and you can see the steam coming off your compost pile. And if you were to walk out there, and we'll actually put a thermometer in ours, and it will get up around 150, 160 degrees. And that is the process of all the organic matter breaking down. Well, as it heats, it kills off the pathogens. So any kind of, gross contaminants that were in your compostable material at this point, they're dead by that. It kills about 99% of them. So it can go right back out and be used in your garden without concern. So does that process make sense? Any questions on that?
You're saying this is mid-range.
Yes.
Mid-style.
Yep. Yeah, so, if we say this is mid-range, this is like, hey, we feed my family from the garden, and every now and then we grow too many cucumbers or zucchini, and we give them to our family members. So if you've got a multi-acre garden, or anyone who knows Mark, who lives out on Funny River Road, the Wilderness Farm, where he's got 3 acres, this does not work for him because it doesn't scale to his needs. But, if you're feeding yourself and maybe a couple other families, this is a great way to compost. And quite honestly, it's fun. We homeschool our kids. I don't know how many folks here have kids or grandkids. This is a really fun way to get them engaged, and to also use it as, this is how we teach science class, and also math. And it's a lot of fun because it's fast enough. They can actually see the process working. So it really grabs their relatively short attention span. So moving on to the large scale, and this is,
Quick question.
yes,
Coffee grounds.
yes.
We just found out coffee grounds are poisonous to the insects.
It depends.
On
The hard part is like the answer to that is it depends. So certain insects, it is poisonous for them.
worms.
But not all of them. Yes. Yeah. So worms do not like them. Now, one thing I have found is what most people do with everything, and I do this myself, is when you realize, hey, coffee grounds and hulls and everything else are great for my soil, is people will add too many, and that will throw the balance off. So, like, a moderate use of coffee grounds seems to be a good balance, and we've composted with coffee grounds all the time. I personally drink way too much coffee. So if you look in my compost bin, most of this is probably coffee. We still have worms. Believe it or not, I have noticed that if flies come into your soil to lay, obviously, and you start to see the larvae in it, they tend to die off with coffee. So there's a balance there. And
is it the caffeine or what is it?
I'm not sure. I've never been a decaf drinker. If I'm drinking coffee, I need the full strength. Yeah. That's a question I can't answer, but it does kill, it basically does kill some insects, but not all of them.
Okay.
So I wouldn't say stay away from coffee. You can go to any of the local coffee shops, actually, and most of them will actually put their grounds out for you to grab. And they're great. They add nutrients back into the soil really, really quick. And the fact that they're such a small particulate size, they'll never get in the way of planting. So the large scale, let me get my...
Oh, this should be also nice.
So large scale, this is quite the undertaking, and this is actually what my family did this year. So as we're all aware, and anyone who's been in Alaska for more than probably 15 minutes, we have dip net season, which is total chaos in the most beautiful way. So obviously the river over here to my left, just especially this year, we had 2.4 million reds come up through here this year, and that's amazing. That should put a smile on all of our faces. But with that, all of Anchorage and a lot of Canada and a lot of the lower 48 come up here, whether to partake or even just witness that process. And while people are dip netting, there's a lot of fish waste. So what some people will do is they'll clean the fish right on the bank of the river and throw the carcasses and the waste back into the river, which is okay. That is part of the natural process. Obviously, as the fish come upstream and die, that's exactly what happens. The problem with doing that is when people that go to throw them back in, oftentimes they're tired or they have 90 fish to clean that day and they're not trying to get the fish way out into the main current. So what ends up happening is they fall on the bank of the river and they literally sit there, and it's almost more of a contaminant. So some fish going back in is part of the natural process, and that's great. The other thing you'll see is just fish scattered on the riverbank. That's not a good thing. That attracts, all kinds of predators, more flies, more everything. And let's be honest, if we take our family down there, the last thing we want to be is tiptoeing around salmon carcasses. So then they'll take them to some of the fish cleaning stations or processors. What they tend to do normally is then throw them in the dumpster and they go to the landfill. So this year, I actually teamed up with Blair and Rana down at Diamond and Ranch. They're really good, close friends. And he said, hey, for 15 days, it's chaos here. If you want the fish waste, come get it. So I hauled twice a day. I would go down with my truck. My truck still hasn't recovered. There still smells like a fish. But I would go down and I would collect around 1,100 pounds of fish. And we ended up hauling about 24,000 pounds of fish waste from their processing station to our farm. And I mentioned earlier as we were talking before this started, we opened up a whole nother acre of garden at our place this year. And we tested that soil and it was dead. I mean, nothing. Couldn't grow any, wouldn't even grow grass, to be completely honest. And so what we ended up doing is this process. We went in and we stripped all the topsoil, reshaped everything, and then repiled the topsoil as basically a long, rather linear mound. And then what we did with each load of fish is we would actually excavate down 18 inches deep, 18 inches wide, and fill that entire trench with fish waste. So, believe it or not, you can go to, any kind of nursery or Home Depot or any of these places and buy bone meal, fish meal, blood meal. You can buy all these things. Well, we're blessed with it. It's in our backyard. We just have to go out and get it. So we would take just buckets of fish waste and blood and everything else and just dump it directly in the ground. And then the system we had was we would dig one, fill it, dig the next trench to bury that one, and so on and so forth until we basically got about 3/4 of our garden space totally composted with fish this year. So this is step one. It's an amazing process. Believe it or not, there was only smell until we could get it covered. And then we had about a week where the crows and ravens would show up and one eagle, no pests, didn't see a single bear. We bear scat everywhere. No bear got into any of it. And, it was a very, very simple kind of hands-off process, which was a big surprise to me. I thought we would have problems, not so much. So then we move on to phase 2. Again, this is all large scale. Phase 2 is now all the fish waste is buried. Right now there's a dirt cap over it. So then what we ended up doing was taking birch, alder, some cottonwood, and aspen chips. Just any of the tops, we would chip them and blow it over the garden. So we put about 4 inches of wood waste on top of it and then cap that with manure. So once we got to that point, we let that sit and we wanted 2 or 3 good rains to actually start washing some of the nutrients from the manure, from the wood waste down into the fish to actually get the composting process started. Then, this is the only time we use a rototiller on our farm, because we're a no-till farm. Then we get on top of it and rototill all of the organic matter in, and that's when the real composting process begins, and everything starts to break down. So we know dip net season basically ended first day of August. You go out to our farm now and dig a hole, and you can just find some small remnants of fish. So in that period of time, it is decomposed that quick because of this process as you rototill it, just little pieces come up. There's no insects, there's no smell, and we put a cover crop of annual rye, peas, and barley on it. Just basically all annuals. We didn't want the exposed dirt because we wanted to protect against erosion, and a cover crop will help protect your nutrients. And as soon as those plants, their taproot got down in and hit that nitrogen-rich soil, I mean, it's, oh my God, it's amazing. I wish I could show some pictures, but I mean, we've got grass that's 5-6 feet tall, and then you look at the piece where we didn't have enough fish to actually get down to that portion of the garden, and it's about that tall, and it looks pathetic. It's kind of like a yellowish green, where everything else is just dense and rich. So this process works really, really well. It scales to any size garden. And the beauty of it is there's fish waste every year. And you can go to any one of these processing plants and you're actually saving them money. It's pretty easy to swing a deal because we're such a tight-knit community here. You just simply tell them, hey, I have a farm out on this road. I'd like to grab some fish waste. I've never had someone say no. So you just got to be willing to put the labor in. Any questions on that process? Sorry about the squealing. So, that is composting at basically 3 different scales, small, medium, and large. Again, there's different ways of doing it. Now, one thing I would like to touch on, because this is very, very important, and it's often something that is missed when we start talking about composting, especially in small scale and permaculture communities, is basically the symbiotic relationship between your soil, your plants, and mycelium, or basically fungus, right? Most people, when you start talking about mushrooms, their mind goes to, you gross, you slimy, or they're poisonous, or hey, that's a drug, right? So we're not talking about any of those things. There's specific mushrooms and fungi in our area that are called Microrhizal Fungi. And essentially what that means, it's a great big word to say, what these fungi do, and almost their sole purpose in existence, is they live in complete symbiosis with all the plants that we see. So if you look at the woods behind me or the woods behind you, each one of those trees has a relationship with this fungi. So what we do at our place is we actually inoculate our compost with mycorrhizal fungi spores. So when it goes out and it actually hits the garden, they're already pre-inoculated. We don't have to wait for nature to do it on its own. And essentially what we end up doing is the first year of the garden, we're already seeing those connections between the root system of our plants and the mycelium. So everyone always asks, how do I see mycelium? You can go out into the woods and flip over a downed rotting log, and you're going to see a little white web. And it looks like, is that mold? Is it roots? And the answer is, it's mycelium. So what mycelium is they're basically the veins of our soil. And they're these little tubules, and essentially what they do is they spread everywhere. They're amazing. We have a native mushroom here in the community. It's called the garden giant. They grow in your garden, and they spread like you can't imagine. They'll literally go 100 to 200 linear feet in the course of about 18 months. And when you inoculate your soil with it, what they do is they attach the mycelium to the root system of that plant, and they convey moisture and nutrients from the soil, from the surrounding area, to the plant root system, thereby helping the plant grow. So if you can inoculate, and it could be something as simple as identifying a mycorrhizal mushroom in your yard or out in the woods, grabbing one of the caps and literally just putting it in your compost pile. As soon as you break the cap free from the stem of a mushroom, it basically triggers that mushroom to say, oops, hey, we're dying, we need to reproduce. So that night, sometime around 9-10 o'clock at night, believe it or not, it automatically triggers it to drop its spores. It then dumps its spores into your compost bin, and now you have inoculated soil. Now it's just a waiting game, and we stand back and let nature do her thing. And I will say this is an absolute game changer. As I said, at our place, we do a lot of experimental gardening, and we did this in grow tents over the winter because I was bored out of my mind and needed to grow something. So we had one tent where we had nutrient-dense organic soil without the we never inoculated it, and then we had another one, same soil, but I inoculated it. And the yield was about 2.5 times greater with the inoculated soil than the standard soil. So the proof is in the yield. And quite honestly, we never had to fertilize it. I never had to use compost tea in that soil because it had such a beautiful relationship with the mycelial network in the soil, where it was like almost set it and forget it. It was beautiful. So combining composting with mushrooms or with mycelium, it really is a game changer. And it would put Monsanto and Bayer and all these big companies out of business once that knowledge gets out there, because the systems are already in place. And they're beautiful. We just have to basically understand them, respect them, and work with them. So I drew something to hopefully, again, my art skills are horrific. But essentially, your plant, the orange or red would be the root system, and literally this mycelial web will attach to it. And they're like little straws, and they just pump nutrients and moisture into the root system of the plant. It's amazing to witness. So that is, I think I'm running out of time here, and I could obviously go on forever. But just real quick, composting with animals. I don't know who has chickens. Yep. So chickens are great until you have to feed them and take care of them, and then feed them through the winter when they stop producing eggs. There you go. You can butcher them, and then when you butcher them, you realize, like, boy, laying hens are not delicious. They have one purpose. So one thing that works really, really well is combining your compost bin with your chicken coop. So I went over, the bin system, whether you do 1 bin, 3 bins, it doesn't matter. But chickens, they're little dinosaurs. They'll eat anything. They'll even eat other chickens if you're not paying attention. So what we've structured at our place for this next year is one of our compost bins is actually in the chicken coop. So you take your food scraps, you just dump them in. The chickens will work through it all, and they are phase 1 of the composting process, the decomposition process. So they'll break it all down. Obviously, as they're eating, they naturally fertilize it, and it's a beautiful process. So I strongly recommend that. It will add more nutrients to your soil than composting alone. And same thing with pigs. The biggest cost for us here is getting feed up here, obviously. So if you can supplement or totally mitigate the cost of feed with chicken scraps, or swing a deal with, Fred Meyer's or someone and grab some of their produce waste, the chickens don't care if it's bruised, beat up, or half rotten. They'll eat almost anything. So that's basically a great way to not only feed yourself, but also feed your chickens, and then feed your garden in the next year. So just real quick before I jump off, because I'm running out of time, the Community Compost program that I mentioned earlier, like I said, I've been doing it, I think it's been about 6 months, and we work with the Inlet Keeper on this. They've been wonderful to work with. And essentially what this program is anyone who's aware of where the studio is, the Inlet Keeper studio, it's where the goods and what's up is actually located as well on the spur road. There's a small bin just to the right of the door, and that's where the compost drop location is. So we pick it up twice a week. You can just take a bucket. I will gladly give you a bucket if you want one for your house. And every Monday and Thursday, we just drop it off right there. It's basically all the chickens, all the food scraps. It's anything that is compostable. The only thing we cannot put in there is like the GMO plastic. They are compostable, but not the way we do it. It takes about 5 years for those bags to break down, so we try to keep them out of it. But any of your chicken scraps, yard scraps, any of that stuff goes right in there. And then every Monday and Thursday, I bring them over to, at this point, Diamond M Ranch. We feed the chickens, they break everything down, and then we've got good compost to use in the garden. So if you're interested in that, want to know more about it, or if you have chickens yourself and don't mind me swinging by to drop off compost at your place to feed your chickens, let me know. What I'd love to see is over the next few years, this turn into more of a community effort where we can find people with chickens who need food and people who are getting rid of food waste, and we can connect those dots. So we're all helping each other, and maybe we can do an exchange of eggs after the fact or something like that. So it's a win-win. But it would be beautiful if we can work something like that out. So and over the next couple of years, we're going to actually ramp up the Community Compost network and the entire system, and hopefully make it large scale for Soldotna and Kenai to start, and then hopefully the rest of the peninsula. So, any questions?
Can you get too nitrogen rich?
You can, yes.
Because a lot of our compost is
Yep.
chickens.
Yep. So when it is too nitrogen rich, that's when you take a product like this. I mean, this in itself is too nitrogen rich. I mean, this is like borderline explosive, volatile at this point. So all we end up doing is we take this and we use it just like any other concentrate that we use in our lives. Much like if like Dr. Bronner's soap, right? It's concentrate. So you don't use it right out of the bottle, you dilute it. So to dilute this, you would spread that product that maybe has too much nitrogen in it over your soil and mix it in, and then you just diluted it.
Or
And
gas flippers
yep,
and stuff.
exactly. Yep, it will all balance out.
Okay.
Yep, that's the beauty of it. Is nature is smarter than we are, even though we are of nature. Any other questions? Well, wonderful. Thank you so much for attending. Hopefully you learned something. And if you have any other questions or want to know any more about it, I'll be sticking around after.